The night Evelyn Wells walked out of Gilbert Brooks's life, she did not look back. She had said so herself, standing in the doorway of his small ranch house with her traveling bag clutched against her chest like a shield, her dark eyes burning with something that wasn't quite hatred but was close enough to wound. The lantern light had caught the tears she refused to let fall, and Gilbert had stood in the middle of the room he had built with his own 2 hands, watching her go, and he had not moved a single muscle to stop her. "I am done with this place," she had said. "I am done with the dust and the danger and the dying. I am done with the frontier, Gilbert." And then she had said the words that cut the deepest, the ones that lived in his chest like a splinter he could never reach. "I am done with you." The door had swung shut behind her. The latch had clicked. And Gilbert Brooks, who had survived Comanche raids and a drought that killed half his herd and a fever that should have taken him at 24, stood completely still in his kitchen and felt more destroyed than he ever had by any of those things. That was October of 1882 in the dust-scoured territory of New Mexico in the small ranching settlement of Copperhead Creek. He had gone to the window, not to chase her, not to call out. He had simply gone to the window and watched the shape of her disappear into the dark, and then he had done something he could not entirely explain even to himself. He had turned up the wick on the kerosene lamp that sat on the wide front windowsill, and he had left it burning. He told himself it was habit. He told himself it was because he always kept a light when he was awake. He told himself a dozen reasonable, sensible things that had nothing to do with the truth. The truth was that some stubborn, aching part of him believed she would come back. And every single night for 4 months and 11 days, without exception, without failure, without letting himself examine too closely what it meant, Gilbert Brooks left that window lit. But to understand how a man and a woman arrive at a moment like that, at a door swinging shut in the October cold, at words spoken in the heat of fear and grief that cannot be taken back once they are in the air, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to the spring, to the way Evelyn Wells first came to Copperhead Creek, and to the particular, unavoidable way that 2 people who have both been badly hurt by the world sometimes find each other anyway. It was April of 1882 when the stage from Santa Fe rattled into Copperhead Creek with 7 passengers and a broken rear axle that needed 2 days to repair. Most of those passengers were miners and a traveling dry goods merchant named Hollies who complained about the delay loud enough for the whole settlement to hear. But one of them was quiet. One of them stepped down from the stage and stood in the street and looked at the wide brown land around her with an expression that Gilbert, watching from the post office steps, would later describe as a person preparing themselves for something difficult. She was 26 years old. She was wearing a gray traveling dress that had seen better days and a hat that was doing its best against the April wind. She carried 2 bags and a leather satchel, and she moved with the kind of deliberate precision that told you she had been on her own for a while, that she was not waiting for anyone to help her, that she had learned not to expect it. Gilbert Brooks was 31. He had been in Copperhead Creek for 4 years, ever since he had come west from Missouri with $200, a surveying background, and the particular restlessness that takes hold of certain men after certain losses. He had built his ranch on the eastern edge of the settlement's grazing land, 160 acres that he was slowly, methodically turning from nothing into something. He had a house, a barn, 12 cattle, and a contract with the Territorial Army post 20 miles south to supply them with beef every quarter. He did not, as the women of the settlement were fond of observing, have a wife. He had offers of a sort. Copperhead Creek had 3 unmarried women of appropriate age, and their families had made their availability known with the particular frontier directness that left nothing to imagination. Gilbert had been polite and thoroughly unavailable. He had a dark past that he kept to himself, a set of memories from Missouri that he had no interest in handing to anyone else to carry, and the idea of being close enough to someone to have to explain those memories struck him as more frightening than any raid or drought. He watched the woman from the stage stand in the middle of the street and look at the land, and something shifted in him. He couldn't have named it in that moment. It was just a shift, like a stone moving underwater. He went about his business. He collected his mail, 3 letters and a notice about the water rights dispute that was consuming half the territorial government's attention, and he walked back to his horse at the hitching post. The woman with the gray dress was talking to Bess Hayloren, who ran the boarding house, and gesturing toward the broken stage with the patient expression of someone rearranging a plan. "Rooms are 2 bits a night," he heard Bess say, "or $1.50 for the week if you're staying longer." "I am not staying longer than the stage allows," the woman said. Her voice was clear and direct. "I am on my way to Albuquerque." "What's in Albuquerque?" Bess asked, with the complete absence of social restraint that characterized life in small frontier settlements. "A position," the woman said. "As a school teacher. I have a contract." Gilbert untied his horse. He rode home. He spent the afternoon mending a section of fence on the north pasture and did not think about gray traveling dresses or clear direct voices at all, which was why he thought about both of them approximately every 10 minutes. It was the broken axle that changed things, as broken things have a way of doing. By evening, word had spread that the repair would take 2 full days, possibly 3 if the blacksmith had to send to Mesilla for a part. The passengers were stranded. The dry goods merchant complained. The miners went to the saloon. And Evelyn Wells, who had introduced herself by that time to everyone within earshot because Bess Hayloren had made introductions her personal mission, was sitting on the porch of the boarding house with a book open in her lap, and an expression that suggested she was not reading a single word of it. Gilbert rode past on his way to pick up a coil of wire from the general store. He did not slow down. He picked up the wire, he exchanged 3 words with the storekeeper about the water rights dispute, and he rode home. He rode past the boarding house twice. Both times he did not slow down. On the 3rd pass, which was entirely unnecessary given the layout of Copperhead Creek and the location of his ranch relative to the general store, Evelyn Wells looked up from her unread book and caught him looking at her. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked back at her book. Gilbert rode home. He ate supper. He did not sleep particularly well. The next morning, he rode into town on business that he invented for the purpose, and found Evelyn Wells in the general store, examining a display of writing paper with the focused attention of someone spending money carefully. He bought a sack of cornmeal he did not need and stood near the counter, and tried to think of something to say that was not entirely transparent in its motivation. "The schoolhouse in Albuquerque," he said finally. "You'll be working for the territorial district." She looked at him. She had dark eyes, almost black, with a watchfulness in them that he recognized because he had the same thing himself. The eyes of people who had been surprised badly once and were not planning to be surprised again. "Yes," she said. "Do you know the district?" "I know the territory." He shifted the cornmeal to his other hand. "It's a long ride from here to Albuquerque. Stage road through the Jornada is rough this time of year." "I am aware," she said. "I came from Santa Fe." "Santa Fe," he said. "Before that," she studied him for a moment, not unfriendly, evaluating. "Chicago," she said. "Before that, Cincinnati. Long way from Cincinnati." "Yes," she agreed. "It is." He could have left it there. He should have, probably. Instead, he said, "I've got a Palomino mare that needs exercising and a stretch of the creek bed that runs north of here that's worth seeing. If you have time to fill while you're waiting." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I am not particularly interested in being shown the sights by a stranger." "Gilbert Brooks," he said. "I own the Brooks Ranch east of town, 4 years in Copperhead Creek. Ask Bess Hayloren, she'll vouch for me." "And why would I need a vouching?" "You might not," he said. "I just thought it was fair to offer." Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but a kind of recalibration, a reassessment. She held out her hand. "Evelyn Wells," she said. Chicago, Cincinnati, Santa Fe, and temporarily Copperhead Creek. He shook it. Her grip was firm and brief. "I will think about the creek," she said, and turned back to the writing paper. He walked out of the general store with a sack of unnecessary cornmeal, and something he could only describe as a feeling of having won something, though he could not have said exactly what. She came to see the creek that afternoon. He brought both horses and met her at the edge of town at 2 o'clock as agreed, and they rode north along the dry arroyos where the spring runoff had carved channels through the pale rock, and the creek itself ran low and copper-colored between banks of salt cedar and cottonwood, just beginning to leaf out in that particular tender green that the New Mexico spring produced for approximately 3 weeks before the heat burned it brown. She rode well. Noticed that immediately, not with the careful posture of someone taught to ride in a city stable, but with the easy balance of someone who had spent real time in a saddle. He mentioned it. "I grew up in southern Ohio," she said. "Before Cincinnati, my father had a farm." "I grew up on a farm in Missouri," he said, "before here." "What made you leave Missouri?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. The horses moved through the salt cedar, their hooves quiet in the soft sand. "Loss," he said finally. "The kind that makes a place feel wrong to stay in." She nodded slowly. "I understand that," she said, and the tone of her voice told him she was speaking from the same kind of country, that dark interior geography where the landmarks are all griefs. He did not push. She did not elaborate. They rode in a silence that was comfortable in the way that silences between people who understand each other can be, even early, even before they know the details. "What did you lose?" she asked after a while. He had not answered that question for anyone in 4 years. He answered it for her. "My wife," he said. "3 years after we married, fever, and the baby we were expecting." He paused, "both of them in the same week." Evelyn was quiet. The cottonwoods rustled. "I lost my husband," she said. "Not to illness." She stopped and he waited. "He left 2 years into our marriage, went west and didn't come back." She said it with the flat evenness of something that had been grieved fully enough to be stated plainly. "I waited 18 months. Then I stopped waiting and went west too, though I went looking for a different kind of life than the one he left me for." "The teaching contract," Gilbert said. "The teaching contract," she agreed. "There is a shortage of teachers in the territories, and I find I am not interested in going back to Cincinnati and being a widow in a place that remembers me as something else." He understood that completely. He understood it so entirely that it caught in his throat for a moment. "No," he said, "that's not livable." She looked at him with those dark, watchful eyes. "No," she said, "it is not." They turned back toward town when the sun began to drop. They did not run out of conversation. They talked about the water rights dispute, and about the territorial school system, and about a book she had in her bag that he had read the previous winter, a novel by Henry James that neither of them had particularly liked, but both found interesting to argue about. They argued about it with the ease of two people who had not had someone to argue with for a long time, and found it unexpectedly delightful. At the edge of town she gave his mare back and thanked him in a way that was genuine but careful, keeping a precise distance still, not letting anything be mistaken for more than what it was. "The stage leaves day after tomorrow," she said, "if the axle is repaired." "Yes," he said. "Then thank you, Gilbert Brooks," she said, "for the creek." He watched her walk toward the boarding house. He sat on his horse in the April evening and watched her go and thought about the fact that she was leaving in 2 days for a life in Albuquerque, and felt that strange, particular gravity that is the early warning of a feeling one has not planned for. The axle took 3 days, not 2. On the second evening, Gilbert came to the boarding house at 7 o'clock with his hat in his hand, and an invitation to supper at the only restaurant Copperhead Creek possessed, which was the back room of the saloon, where Rosario Vega cooked the finest red chili in the territory, and maintained a strict dignity about the establishment that kept the rougher elements of the saloon's clientele from disrupting the dinner hour. Evelyn said yes. Rosario brought them chili Colorado and fresh tortillas and a pot of coffee, and they ate and talked for 2 hours about everything that was not what they were actually talking about, which was the particular magnetic pull between two people who have both been hurt and have both rebuilt themselves carefully, and now find themselves in the vicinity of someone who makes the careful rebuilding feel, for the first time in a long time, like less of a necessity and more of a choice. He walked her back to the boarding house. The night was cool and enormous around them, the sky dense with stars in the way that the New Mexico sky achieves on clear spring nights, a darkness so full of light that it inverts your sense of what emptiness is. "I leave tomorrow," she said at the boarding house door. "Yes," he said. She looked up at him. That watchfulness in her eyes had something else in it now, something uncertain and unresolved. "I have a contract," she said, "in Albuquerque." "I know," he said. "I am not looking for something complicated." "Neither am I," he said, and then honestly, though I seem to have found it anyway. She was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled just slightly with one corner of her mouth. It was the first real smile he had seen from her, and it did something irreparable to his chest. "Good night, Gilbert Brooks," she said. "Good night, Evelyn Wells," he said. She went inside. He walked back to his horse and rode home through the star-crowded dark and sat at his kitchen table for a long time looking at nothing in particular. She left the next morning. He was at the stage depot. He had not planned to be, and then he was. She saw him and did not seem surprised, which told him she had not been surprised by much about this 2 days in Copperhead Creek. "I could write," he said. It came out more simply than he'd intended, without any of the careful framing he'd been constructing in his head since approximately 4 in the morning. She considered him for a long moment. Around them, the stage depot was loud with the departing passengers and the driver and Bess Hayloren extracting a promise from the dry goods merchant to bring better fabric selections next time through. "All right," Evelyn said. "You can write." He watched the stage pull out. He stood in the street until it was gone. Then he went back to his ranch and his fence mending and his cattle and his quarterly beef contract. And that evening he sat down and wrote her a letter that took him 4 drafts to get right. She wrote back within 2 weeks. Letters, it turned out, were their native language. They were both readers and thinkers and people who had learned to be precise with words because they had found imprecision costly. Their correspondence in those early months was careful and revealing in equal measure, 2 people slowly lowering the drawbridges of the carefully constructed castles they had built around themselves, letting each other see one room at a time. He told her about Missouri, about his wife, Clara, who had been kind and funny and gone too soon, about the farm he had sold because he couldn't walk past the room where they had been planning a nursery, about the 2 years he had spent drifting before he ended up in New Mexico and found, in the physical work of building something from nothing, a reason to stay somewhere. She told him about her marriage, about a man named Frederick who had been charming and then cruel and then absent, who had gone to California with another woman's name on his lips and left Evelyn with nothing but a shared debt, and the cold recognition that she had missed every warning sign, because she had wanted so badly to believe the version of him she had invented. She told him about the 18 months of waiting and the day she had decided to stop, and the particular liberation and loneliness of that decision. They wrote about books and about the territorial politics and about the small daily events of their separate lives. She was teaching 32 children in a one-room schoolhouse on the edge of Albuquerque, most of them the children of Mexican and Anglo settlers, several of them children of Apache scouts who had served with the army and settled nearby. She wrote about them with a fierce, specific affection that told Gilbert everything he needed to know about who she was. He rode to Albuquerque in August. He told himself it was business. He had business. He had a meeting with a cattle broker in the territory's largest settlement that could genuinely not be conducted by letter. He combined the business with 2 days in Albuquerque and sent Evelyn a letter telling her he would be there on the 14th and asking, with a precision of casualness that fooled neither of them, whether she might be available for supper. She met him outside the hotel on the evening of the 14th, in a blue dress that he would remember for the rest of his life. that particular shade of deep blue against her dark hair and her dark eyes. And they walked to a restaurant near the plaza and had supper for 4 hours, and talked the whole time with the ease of people who have been corresponding for months, and find the voice and the face and the presence of a person only deepen what they have already built in words. He walked her home through the quiet Albuquerque streets under a sky that was doing its best impression of every romantic aspiration ever attributed to the southwestern night. And at the gate of the small adobe house, where she was renting rooms, he stopped, and she stopped, and they looked at each other. And the careful precision and the drawbridges and the protected distances were all still technically in place, but the air between them was doing something else entirely. "I would like to come back," he said. "In October." "October," she said. "For longer than 2 days," he said, "if that's acceptable." She looked at him with those dark eyes that had watched him from the beginning, with that particular combination of wariness and intelligence, and he saw the wariness shift just slightly, just enough. "October," she said again. "Yes, come in October." He came in October. He stayed 5 days. On the 3rd day, he kissed her for the first time in the small courtyard behind her rented house, where a cottonwood tree was dropping its last gold leaves, and the October afternoon was warm and still and completely private. She kissed him back with a thoroughness that left no ambiguity about the matter, and then pressed her forehead against his shoulder, and was quiet for a moment in the way that told him she was feeling the same terrifying, beautiful, dangerous thing he was feeling. "I did not expect this," she said quietly. "Neither did I," he said. "I am not complaining." She laughed, which was a sound he had been waiting to hear since April, and which was better than he had imagined, low and genuine and unguarded in a way that nothing else about her had been yet. "No," she said, "I suppose I am not either." He came back in December. He stayed 10 days. He met her students and helped fix the roof of her schoolhouse when a winter storm opened a gap in it, and sat with her in the evenings in her small adobe house, where she had made a home out of very little, with books and a wool blanket and a kitchen garden visible through the back window. And he felt something he had not felt since before Clara died, which was the specific comfort of being known by someone. In January, he wrote her a letter that was not entirely a letter. It was a letter that contained, among its other honest and carefully chosen words, a question that was not casual and not careful, but was as plain and direct as he knew how to be. He asked her if she would consider coming to Copperhead Creek. Not to give up her teaching, she could teach anywhere. There was a schoolhouse in Copperhead Creek that had been without a teacher for 2 years. He asked if she would consider, when her Albuquerque contract concluded in the spring, coming to Copperhead Creek. He did not use the word permanently because he thought that might be more pressure than the question required, but they both understood what he meant. She took 12 days to write back. He counted every one of them. When her letter came, it was the longest one she had written, 6 full pages in her clear, even hand, and it moved through every argument and consideration and fear with the methodical honesty that he had come to understand was simply how her mind worked. She talked about the frontier and its dangers and its rawness, about her independence and how carefully she had built it, about the hidden motive she suspected in herself when she examined her feelings for him, which was that she was afraid she was choosing safety over solitude when what she actually wanted was neither. She talked about his dark past and her own, and whether 2 people carrying that much weight could build something light together. And at the end of the 6 pages, she said yes. She said yes with reservations clearly stated, and with no promises about how long or how permanent or what the future held. But she said yes, and Gilbert Brooks sat at his kitchen table in February with 6 pages in his hands, and felt the kind of happiness that arrives quietly, without fanfare, the kind that is so large it is almost frightening. She came in April. Exactly a year after she had arrived on the Broken Axle stage, and stood in the street, and looked at the land like she was preparing herself for something difficult. She came with her 2 bags and her leather satchel and her books, which now required an additional trunk, and she came with her eyes open and her guard still partially up and her independence entirely intact. And Gilbert met her at the stage depot with both horses saddled, because he thought she might want to ride out to the ranch before she saw the inside of it, to approach it on her own terms across the open land. He was right. She took the reins and they rode east together through the spring afternoon, and she looked at the low adobe house and the barn and the north pasture and the copper-colored creek bed and the enormous sky above all of it, and she was quiet for a long time. "Well," she said finally, "it is honest land." "It is," he agreed. "I can work with honest land," she said. She moved her things into the east bedroom. She was very clear about that arrangement, about needing her own space and her own beginning. He was entirely clear about respecting it. They were two grown people who had both been through enough to understand the value of things done right rather than fast. She took over the Copperhead Creek schoolhouse, and within 3 weeks had it running with a precision and warmth that made her immediately essential to the settlement. She taught 23 children, including the 2 young children of Domingo and Catalina Reyes, who ran the small Mexican-owned trading post at the edge of town, and a quiet boy named Thomas, whose father was a Mescalero Apache man who worked the South Ranch as a hand. Gilbert watched her with her students sometimes, when he rode in to collect mail or supplies. She was different in the schoolhouse than she was in private moments, larger somehow, more vivid, with a quality of complete attention for the children that was the purest thing he had ever seen. They settled into a life. They ate supper together every evening at the large kitchen table he had built from cottonwood planks. They rode out together on Sunday mornings when the weather allowed, along the creek or up into the low hills to the north where the pinyon pines grew and the air smelled of resin and distance. They talked. They argued about books and about territorial politics and about the right way to stake tomatoes in the kitchen garden she planted against the south wall of the house. They were, in all the ways that mattered, building something. He kissed her in the kitchen one Tuesday evening in May while she was making coffee, and she kissed him back so deliberately, and with such complete intention that it made everything prior seem like it had been a warm-up for this particular moment. He held her face in his hands, and she held his shirt front in both her fists, and neither of them moved for a long time. "I am still reserving the right to change my mind about things," she said when she stepped back. "You always have that right," he said. "I just want you to know that the reservation does not mean I intend to exercise it," she said. "All right," he said. "I am trying to tell you," she said, with a touch of exasperation at her own difficulty saying it, "that I think I love you." "I know," he said. "I think I love you too." She huffed out a small breath. That was supposed to be harder to say. Was it hard? She thought about it. "Less hard than I expected," she admitted. "That is either very good or very terrifying." "I vote very good," he said. "I know you do," she said, but she was smiling. He asked her to marry him in June, on the same creek bank where he had first taken her 2 Aprils ago. He had given the speech a great deal of thought and had several well-considered paragraphs prepared about permanence and partnership, and the particular kind of love that was built carefully and lasted because of that care. What he actually said, when the moment arrived and she was standing in the late afternoon light with the salt cedar rustling around them, was, "I want you to stay, not just this year, every year." She was quiet for a moment. The creek ran copper between its banks. A pair of herons lifted from the water somewhere downstream. "Every year is a long time," she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm counting on it." She looked at him for a long moment with those dark, watchful eyes, and he saw in them all the things she had been through and all the ways she had rebuilt herself and the specific courage it had taken to come here at all and to let him in room by room over 2 years of letters and visits and evenings and Sundays. "Yes," she said. "Every year, Gilbert." They were married in August of 1882 at the Copperhead Creek Church, in a ceremony attended by most of the settlement and by 3 of Evelyn's former students from Albuquerque who had ridden up with their families because she had mattered that much to them. Rosario Vega made the wedding supper and Bess Halloran cried loudly enough to be heard from the back pew, and Domingo Reyes played guitar in the churchyard afterward, until the stars came out and people danced in the August dark. Evelyn wore the blue dress from Albuquerque. Gilbert wore his best suit, which he had ordered from Santa Fe specifically for this purpose. He stood at the front of the church and watched her walk toward him and felt something so large and so complete that it occupied every corner of him and left no room for anything that wasn't it. They were happy. That is important to say plainly, because what comes next requires the full weight of that happiness behind it. They were genuinely, specifically, deeply happy, in the way that people who have both been through loss and rebuilding can be when they finally arrive at something true. Not perfect. They argued, sometimes seriously, about money and about the ranch's expansion plans, and about her insistence on teaching and his occasional trouble asking for help when he needed it, his tendency to carry things alone that were too heavy for one person. But the foundation was solid and they both knew it, and it made the arguments navigable, made them finish with their hands finding each other across whatever distance the argument had made. And then September happened. In September of 1882, three things occurred in quick succession that broke something open that Evelyn had believed was healed. The first was a raid on the McAllister homestead 7 miles south of Copperhead Creek. It was not an Apache raid, as the initial panicked reports claimed. It was, when the facts became clear, the work of a small band of outlaws who had been running stolen cattle through the territory, men who were desperate and violent in the way that the frontier's darker elements produced. The McAllister family survived, but their barn was burned and their 12-year-old son was shot in the shoulder, and the sound of the gunfire had been audible from Copperhead Creek in the late afternoon quiet. Evelyn had been in the schoolhouse. She had heard the shots. She had looked at the 23 children in front of her and felt something ancient and cold close around her heart. The second thing was a letter from her sister in Cincinnati, delivered the same week. Her sister's husband had died of consumption, leaving her sister with 2 young children and very little money. The letter was not a request for Evelyn to come home, but it was written in a tone that was one step removed from despair, and it brought Cincinnati back to Evelyn in all its familiarity and all its safety, its distance from gunfire and raids, and the particular rawness of a place where civilization had not yet fully claimed the land. The third thing was that the outlaw band, rooted from the territory by a combined party of ranchers and territorial marshals, came through the northern edge of Copperhead Creek on their way out. It was 2 in the morning. Gilbert was one of the men who had joined the pursuit, and he was 12 miles away when 3 of the fleeing outlaws rode through the edge of town, firing their rifles at nothing in particular, the random, furious discharge of men who had lost and knew it. No one was hit. No real damage was done. But Evelyn was alone in the ranch house when she heard the shots, and she lay on the floor of the bedroom in the dark with her heart hammering, and her fists pressed against her chest and felt, with sudden and overwhelming clarity, that she could not do this. She could not live in a place where this was a possible Tuesday night. She could not watch children get shot in their barn 7 miles away and lie on her floor at 2 in the morning and wait to find out if her husband was coming home. Gilbert came home at dawn. He was fine. He was tired and covered in trail dust, and he came through the door looking for her, and when he found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with her hands around a cup of cold coffee, he crossed the room fast and held her. "You're all right," he said. "Evelyn, you're all right." "I know," she said. Her voice was flat and strange to her own ears. He pulled back to look at her. He knew, she could see it in his face, that something had shifted. He had the knowledge of her by then, the specific map of how she moved and spoke and what her voice meant, and he knew that this particular flatness was different from tiredness or ordinary fear. "Tell me," he said. She tried to tell him. She tried to explain the McAllister boy's shoulder, and the letter from her sister, and the 2 in the morning shots from the dark, and how all 3 of those things together had done something to the argument she had been making to herself for 2 years about how the frontier was livable, about how the beauty and the freedom and the honest land made the rawness worth it. "My sister needs me," she said. "And I keep thinking that if those shots had been real, if those men had come to this door instead of through the edge of town, you might have been 12 miles away and I might have been—" She stopped. "You would have been all right," he said. And she heard in his voice that he believed it entirely, that this was the frontier worldview she had never quite fully absorbed, the particular acceptance of danger as a condition of life out here that made it possible for people to stay. "That's not enough for me," she said. "Gilbert, I'm sorry, but it is not enough." He looked at her for a long moment. She saw the hurt move through him like a weather system, fast and visible and then gone behind something steadier. "What are you saying?" "I don't know yet," she said. "I need to think." She thought for 3 days. She wrote her sister. She sat with her students in the schoolhouse and watched them and thought about the McAllister boy and about the fact that any of these 23 children could have been in that barn. She lay awake next to Gilbert, who was giving her the space she had asked for and lying very still in a way that told her the stillness was costing him something. On the 4th day she went to him in the kitchen and said, "I need to go to Cincinnati. My sister needs help. She has 2 children and she is alone and I need to go." He studied her face. "For how long?" "I don't know," she said. "Evelyn," his voice was careful, "is this about your sister or is this about what you're feeling about this place?" "Both," she said. "I can't separate them right now." He was quiet for a long time. "I can't come with you," he said. "The ranch, the cattle contract, I can't leave for an indefinite time." "I know that," she said. "I'm not asking you to come." Another long silence. "Then what are you asking?" "I am asking for time," she said. "I am asking to go east and be with my sister and think about whether I can come back to this." The pain in his face was something she would carry for a long time. He was not a man who showed pain easily, and the fact that he couldn't hide it now told her the size of it. "Can you come back?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, and the honesty of it, the refusal to comfort him with a promise she wasn't sure she could keep, cost her enormously. "I hope so. I want to, but I don't know." He nodded slowly. He stood up and went to the window and stood there with his back to her for a moment. "Then go," he said. "Be with your sister, think." "Gilbert, I'm not angry," he said. He turned back to her and she could see that he meant it, that the thing in his face was not anger. "I'm not. But I need a minute." He went outside. She packed her bags in the east bedroom, the room she had moved into when she first arrived a year and a half ago, long before it had become their room. She packed them with hands that were steady because she had made the decision and she was committed to it. And she tried not to hear the particular sound of him somewhere on the property, the sound of work being done in lieu of falling apart. He drove her to the stage depot himself the next morning. They rode in silence for most of the way, not the comfortable silence of their Sunday rides, but the silence of 2 people holding too much to be able to find the words for it without breaking something. At the depot he helped her with her bags. He stood in front of her with his hat in his hands in the same way he had stood at the boarding house all those months ago when she first arrived, and the parallel of it hit her like a physical blow. "I love you," she said. "You know that." "I know," he said. "I love you." She picked up her bag. She looked at him one more time, memorizing the exact way he looked in that morning light, the particular set of his shoulders and the careful, contained hurt in his eyes. She turned toward the stage, then she stopped. She looked back at him. "I am done with this place," she said. The words came out more final than she intended, more sweeping, the fear speaking rather than the love. "I am done with the dust and the danger and the dying. I am done with the frontier, Gilbert." She saw him absorb it. She saw him stand very still. "I am done with you," she said, and the moment the words left her she knew they were wrong, knew they were the fear talking and not the truth, but they were in the air and the stage driver was calling for boarding and she could not take them back and she could not stay and she went. She went east. The stage carried her to Santa Fe and then she took the train from Santa Fe to Kansas City and then to Cincinnati. She sat in the rattling train car and watched the territory fall away behind her, the brown land and the big sky becoming rolling plains, and then the green hills of the eastern country, and she held her traveling bag in her lap and stared out the window, and the words she had said came back to her every hour like a punishment. "I am done with you." It was not true. She had known it was not true the moment it left her lips. It was the most untrue thing she had ever said. And it was also the most damaging thing she had ever said, and there was nothing she could do about it from a moving train going east. Her sister was in a bad way. Her sister Margaret, who was 32 and had 2 boys aged 8 and 5, was managing all right in practical terms, but was gutted by grief, moving through her days with the mechanical functioning of someone who had put their genuine self on a shelf until things got better. Evelyn stayed with her. She helped with the boys, whose names were Henry and James, and who were sweet and bewildered by the absence of their father. She helped with the finances, helped Margaret find a reliable seamstress position with a dry goods concern that would let her work from home. She did all the things a good sister does, and it was real and it mattered, and she was glad she came. But Cincinnati was not home. She had said she was done with the frontier, and in Cincinnati she walked the familiar streets and sat in the familiar parlors of women she had known before her marriage, and felt the complete disorienting sense of having outgrown something she could not get back into. The way a coat fits perfectly until one day it does not, and you cannot say precisely what changed. The streets were safe. The houses were solid. There was no gunfire at 2 in the morning. There were no raids and no drought, and no enormous indifferent sky pressing down on you with its gorgeous, terrifying vastness. And she missed all of it. She missed all of it in a way that was so specific and so relentless that she had to be careful not to talk about it, because when she started she could not easily stop. She missed the smell of the desert after rain. She missed the sound of the creek running low and copper-colored. She missed her students, their 23 faces, the specific way that Thomas sat with his shoulders slightly hunched until he understood a problem and then straightened up, the way Domingo and Catalina's daughter, Rosa, laughed at everything with an abandon that Evelyn tried to encourage rather than contain. She missed Gilbert. She missed him in the specific, cellular way that you miss a person who has become part of the daily architecture of your life, who is present in so many small things that their absence makes each small thing a reminder. She missed the way he moved in the kitchen in the mornings, unhurried and quiet. She missed the way he listened, with the complete, patient attention of someone who had decided long ago that other people's words deserved to be heard. She missed his voice and his hands and his particular laugh, which was rare and always genuine, and always made her feel that something good had just been established. She missed who she was with him. Which was the most disorienting thing of all, to discover that there was a version of herself that she liked better than any previous version, and that version required a specific geography and a specific person to exist in. She wrote to him. She sat at her sister's writing desk 3 weeks after she arrived and wrote him a letter. It was not the long, careful, methodical letter she would have written a year ago, the one that moved through every argument and consideration. It was a much shorter letter, only 2 pages, and the first paragraph said, "I am sorry for what I said. The last thing I told you was not the truth, and I think you know that, but I want to say it plainly. I love you. I am confused and frightened, and I do not know yet what I am going to do, but I am not done with you, and I never was." She sent it and waited. She waited 2 weeks. No response came. She wrote again. 3 pages this time, more honest about the specific fears that had driven her to the stage that morning, honest about the McAllister raid and what it had cracked open in her, and the way her sister's letter had arrived at exactly the wrong moment to tip the balance. She was honest about Cincinnati too, about how she was realizing that safety and home were not the same thing and that she had confused them badly. Another week. No response. The silence terrified her. It was a specific, particular terror that had its roots in the hidden motive she had always suspected in herself, the fear that she would, when pushed, repeat the pattern of her first marriage and drive away the best thing in her life with her own flinching. She wrote a 3rd letter. This one was short. It said, Gilbert, are you there? Please write back. She sent it. She did not sleep well for the next 5 days. And then, on the 6th day, a letter arrived from Copperhead Creek in Gilbert Brooks's handwriting. She tore it open at the door of her sister's house, standing in the November cold in her house coat, and Margaret watched from the hallway with the boys pressed against her skirt, and the look on Evelyn's face as she read was apparently quite something, because Margaret said afterward that she had never seen anyone's whole body change like that from the beginning of a page to the end. It was not a long letter. It was not a careful letter. It was the most direct thing he had ever written to her, 4 paragraphs in handwriting that was slightly less even than usual, as if he had written it fast. He had not written back to the first 2 letters, he said, because he had not known what to say. He had been sitting with what she had told him, the words at the stage depot and the words in her letters, trying to sort out which feelings were his and which were just the shock of them. He was still not sure he had sorted it completely, but he could not let a 3rd letter go unanswered because the thought of her in Cincinnati not knowing if he was there was worse than not having sorted it. He was there, he said. He was on the ranch. He was working. He was fine, or a version of fine. He was not telling her to come back, he wrote. He understood why she had left, and he understood the fear behind it, and he had no interest in asking her to live a life that genuinely frightened her. But he wanted her to know that whatever she decided, she deserved to make the choice from an honest place, and the honest place he could offer her was this: he loved her. He had not stopped. He was not going to stop. The window in the front of the house was lit every night, and he was going to leave it lit. That was it. That was all he said about the window, just that it was lit and he was going to leave it lit. No explanation of what he meant by it, no elaboration, no pressure. Just the simple, plain statement of it. She stood in the November cold at her sister's door and read that paragraph 3 times and felt something she had been holding very tightly for 2 months begin, slowly, to release. She wrote back that day. She told him she had read his letter and that she was going to need a little more time, that she wanted to stay through Christmas to make sure her sister and the boys were on solid ground. She told him that the window meant more than he might have intended it to mean. She told him to keep it lit. He wrote back, "It will be lit." November became December. She stayed through Christmas as she had promised her sister. She helped Margaret find a rhythm for the new configuration of their lives. She spent Christmas morning with the boys, watching Henry and James tear into their modest presents with the complete, uncomplicated joy that 8-year-olds bring to Christmas morning. She sat with Margaret on Christmas evening and they talked until late about their parents' farm in Ohio, about the people they had been before their separate marriages and separate losses and separate rebuildings, about who they were now. "You're going back," Margaret said. It was not a question. "Yes," Evelyn said. "The frontier," Margaret said, and she said it with a faint tone that Evelyn recognized as her sister's version of worry, wrapped in neutrality. "The frontier," Evelyn said. "And Gilbert." "Tell me about Gilbert," Margaret said. "Really tell me, not the letter version." So Evelyn told her. She told her about the Palomino mare and the creek bank with the April cottonwoods and the Albuquerque courtyard where he had kissed her for the first time. She told her about the letters and the meals at Rosario Vega's table and the Sunday morning rides. She told her about the August wedding and the kitchen garden against the south wall and the arguments about books and tomato staking and the particular way he listened when she talked, the complete, patient attention of it. She told her about the way he had stood at the stage depot that October morning with his hat in his hands, absorbing what she had said to him, not begging her to stay and not pretending it didn't hurt. Margaret was quiet for a long time after she finished. "He sounds like a good man," she said. "He is," Evelyn said. "He is the best man I have ever known." "Then go home, Evelyn," her sister said. She left Cincinnati on the 2nd day of January, 1883. She took the train to Kansas City, and then the train to Santa Fe, and she sat in the train car watching the country change back in the reverse of the direction she had traveled in October. The green hills giving way to rolling plains, giving way to the first brown reaches of the territory. And she felt herself shift with it, felt herself settle back into her own skin in a way she hadn't since she'd left. She sent a telegram from Santa Fe to the telegraph office in Mesilla, which was the closest wire to Copperhead Creek. The telegraph operator in Mesilla knew Gilbert by name and promised to send a rider with the message. The message said, "On my way home." Arriving Copperhead Creek Thursday on the stage. "If the lamp is still lit, I am coming in." She did not know if he had gotten the telegram. The rider from Mesilla to Copperhead Creek was not certain, was a matter of goodwill and frontier communication, which was its own kind of faith. The stage from Santa Fe was slow. It was January, and the roads through the Jornada were not friendly in winter, and the stage rocked and jolted and stopped twice to deal with minor problems, and once to wait out a dust storm that came up from the south, gray and absolute. And Evelyn sat in the dark interior of the stopped stage and held onto the seat and listened to the wind and thought about windows. She thought about the fact that he had left that lamp in the window every single night. She thought about what it meant to do a thing every single night for months without any certainty of return, to maintain a gesture of faith and love with no audience and no confirmation. She thought about the particular kind of love that does that keeps the light on not as a demand or a manipulation, but simply as a truth, simply as a statement of, "I am here, I am here, I am here." She had left him with the worst thing she had said in her life. She had said, "I am done with you," and he had gone home and turned up the lamp in the window. The dust storm cleared after an hour. The stage moved on. The last 50 miles to Copperhead Creek took all of Thursday and most of Thursday evening, and it was full dark by the time the stage rattled into the settlement, later than the schedule by 3 hours. The settlement was quiet. The stage depot was lit, and the driver called down that they were stopped, and everyone stirred and stretched and began gathering their things. Evelyn was the only passenger getting off at Copperhead Creek. She stepped down from the stage into the cold January night. The driver handed her bags down. She stood in the street with her bags at her feet and looked east, toward the edge of the settlement where the road ran out into the open land toward the Brooks Ranch. She could see it. Through the darkness and the January cold, across the distance between the stage depot and the eastern edge of town, she could see the small, warm, yellow square of the ranch house window. The lamp was lit. Her breath came out of her in a long, unsteady exhale. She picked up her bags. She walked east through the quiet settlement, past the general store with its dark windows, past the boarding house where Bess Hayloren's upstairs light was on, past the church and the smithy and the schoolhouse, and with every step the light in the ranch house window got larger and more specific and more real. She reached the gate of the ranch. The horses were in the barn. She could hear them. The house was quiet. The yellow light in the window was the kerosene lamp on the wide front windowsill. She went to the door. She knocked. She heard him cross the room. She heard the latch lift. The door opened. Gilbert Brooks stood in the doorway in the lamplight with his shirt untucked and his boots off and his hair slightly disheveled in the way it got after 10 o'clock. And he looked at her with an expression she would spend the rest of her life trying to find adequate words for, which was relief so large it had temporarily replaced everything else. "You got the telegram," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. "Yesterday," he said. "Spent today trying to decide if I was going to meet you at the depot or stay here." He paused. "Decided to stay here." "I saw the window," she said, "from the street." "I know," he said. "I hoped you would." She picked up her bags. "Can I come in?" He stepped back from the door. She walked in. The kitchen was warm from the stove. The table had a coffee cup on it, half full, and a book open face down, the evidence of a man who had been trying to pass time by reading and failing at it. The lamp on the windowsill threw a wide, warm circle of light. She set her bags down. She turned to face him. "I need to say something," she said, "and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." "All right," he said. "I was wrong," she said. "The McAllister raid and Margaret's letter and the 2 in the morning shots, they all hit me at once and I was frightened and I ran. I had a good reason to be frightened. The frontier is genuinely frightening. The danger is real. I am not going to pretend I have solved all of that because I have not." She took a breath. "But what I said to you was wrong. I said I was done with you, and I have spent every day since then knowing that was a lie and needing to come back here and tell you that." He was watching her steadily, the way he always watched her, with that complete, patient attention that she had loved from almost the beginning. "I'm not done with you," she said. "I am the opposite of done with you. I think I am barely started with you, Gilbert, and I am sorry it took me 4 months to get back here and tell you that." He crossed the room to her. He took her face in his hands, the same way he had in the Albuquerque courtyard almost a year and a half ago, and she held the front of his shirt in both her fists the same way she had then, and he looked at her for a long moment before he said anything. "I left the lamp on," he said, "every night." "I know," she said. "I know you did. Because you were coming back," he said. "I didn't know when, but you were coming back." "How did you know that?" she asked. "Because of who you are," he said simply. "Because you don't say things you don't mean when you've thought about them, and you had not thought about those words. I knew that the second they were out of your mouth." She felt the tears arrive finally after 4 months of holding them back. They arrived without drama, just quietly, the way long-held things release when they're finally allowed to. "I love you," she said. "I was always going to come back." "I know," he said. "I know, Evelyn." He held her in the lamplight kitchen, and she held him back with everything she had, and the January cold pressed against the windows of the ranch house, and the lamp on the windowsill burned warm and steady, and the whole thing was, in its way, a kind of faith being answered. The next morning she walked to the schoolhouse and looked at it. It had been unused for the 3.5 months she'd been gone, and it showed. Dust on the windows, a mouse nest discovered in the corner behind the wood stove, the chalk on the board still bearing the date of the last day she had taught. October 4th, 1882. She stood in the doorway of the cold schoolhouse and looked at October 4th on the board and felt the weight of time and the gift of return. She cleaned it. She spent the morning sweeping and dusting and relaying the wood stove. She wrote the date on the board. January 9th, 1883. She sent word through the settlement that school would resume Monday. On Monday, 17 of her 23 students came back. The other 6 filtered back over the following 2 weeks, as word reached the outlying ranches and farms. Thomas came back on Wednesday, slipping in during the lunch break and taking his seat as if no time had passed, and when she asked him how he had been he said fine, quietly, and then added, "I'm glad you're back, Miss Evelyn." She had been Mrs. Brooks for 5 months, but the children called her Miss Evelyn and she had never corrected it. "I am glad too, Thomas," she said. "Very glad." The winter passed. She and Gilbert rebuilt the equilibrium of their life together, this time with both of them more explicit about the things they had previously left unsaid, the fears and the needs and the specific ways they each required care that they had not yet been direct enough about. They talked about the frontier's dangers and made a plan together, a real plan, about what to do when things like the McAllister raid happened, so that she was never again lying alone in the dark not knowing what to do. He was going to teach her to shoot. She was going to accept that there was a level of risk in this life that she had to choose deliberately rather than simply tolerate anxiously. "I want to choose it," she told him one evening in February. "That's the thing I figured out in Cincinnati. There is a difference between being frightened of something and choosing it anyway, and being frightened of something and running from it. I want to be the person who chooses it." "You already are," he said. "I want to be more consistently that person," she said. He taught her to shoot. They rode to the north pasture on a Saturday morning in late February with a Colt revolver and a Winchester rifle, and a row of empty tin cans lined on a fence rail, and he stood behind her and showed her the grip and the sight and the breath, the same patient teacher she had watched him be with everything he knew. She was not a natural shot, but she was methodical and unsentimental about learning, and by the end of the morning she could reliably hit the cans at 20 paces with the revolver. She held the Colt at her side and looked at the perforated tin cans and felt something shift. Not the fear disappearing. The fear was still there, would probably always be there, was perhaps a reasonable thing to have about a world that contained armed men on dark roads. But something else was there too now, alongside it. Something that felt like agency. "Better," she said. "Much better," Gilbert agreed. Spring came. The cottonwoods leafed out again in their annual brief and brilliant green. The creek ran higher than usual in March because of the winter snowpack in the mountains, and she and Gilbert rode out on a Sunday morning to see it running full and clear. And the sound of it was different from the low, copper-colored whisper of summer, full and alive and moving fast. She realized on that Sunday morning ride, completely happy. Not the tentative, provisional happiness of the first year, the happiness that kept one eye on the exit. This was a different thing, fuller and more settled, the happiness of someone who has chosen a thing fully and knows why they chose it. "I'm not leaving again," she said. It came out of her unprompted, sitting her horse on the creek bank in the March sun. Gilbert looked at her. "I want you to know that," she said. "Not because I'm promising you something I can't control, because I know the frontier is unpredictable and things happen, but because this is my home. You are my home. I'm not done with this place, and I'm not done with you, and I need you to know that all the way down." He was quiet for a moment. The creek rushed below them. He reached over and took her hand, the same easy gesture he had been making for the better part of 2 years now, her hand in his, both of them on horseback with the big sky above and the land running out in all directions, free and honest in theirs. "I know," he said. "I've known since you came back. I just want to say it plainly," she said. "Then I'll say something plainly too," he said. "I would have waited longer, as long as it took. I was going to leave that lamp on until it burned through the windowsill." She squeezed his hand. "You would have," she said. "That is one of the most infuriating and wonderful things about you." He laughed, that rare and genuine laugh that she had catalogued and treasured since the first time she heard it, and she laughed too, and the creek ran past them in the March morning with the mountains still white in the distance, and it was enough. It was more than enough. In the summer of 1883, 2 things happened that changed the shape of their life in the best possible way. The first was that the territorial school district offered Evelyn a position as a district supervisor, which would involve traveling to several of the small schoolhouses in the region to assist and evaluate the teachers there, in addition to running her own school. It was more work, and it paid more than the base teaching position. She talked it over with Gilbert for 3 evenings and then accepted it. "You'll be on the road some," he said, not as an objection, just as a fact being named. "Yes," she said. "Is that all right? You're asking me?" He raised an eyebrow. "I am consulting you," she said with precision, "because we are partners, but the decision is mine." "The decision is yours," he agreed. "And for the record, you should take it. You've been doing the work of a supervisor since you got here without the title or the pay." She took it. The work suited her completely. She was methodical and honest and deeply invested, and the teachers she worked with responded to her with the same combination of respect and genuine affection that her students always had, because she gave people her complete attention and she never confused honest critique with unkindness. The second thing that happened in the summer of 1883 was that Evelyn discovered she was expecting a child. She told Gilbert on a Tuesday evening in July, sitting across from him at the kitchen table after supper, and she watched his face go through several things very quickly. She could not have predicted what those things would be before she knew him, but she knew him now, and she watched shock move into joy and joy move into that particular, private tenderness that she had only ever seen him show to her. And then he was around the table and she was standing and he was holding her in the kitchen in July with the evening light coming in warm through the windows. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice against her hair. "I am wonderful," she said. "I am a little frightened, but I am wonderful." "Me too," he said. "Both of those things." The baby came in February of 1884, on a cold, clear night that made the stars particularly sharp and bright through the bedroom window. He was a boy, born healthy and loud, with his father's dark hair and his mother's dark eyes, and they named him James Wells Brooks after Evelyn's father and Margaret's younger son, because they were a family that included the people they had loved before they found each other. Copperhead Creek took an interest in the birth of James Wells Brooks with the complete, invested warmth of a small frontier settlement that had watched his parents build something from scratch and taken a proprietary pride in the whole enterprise. Bess Hayloren appeared at the door the morning after the birth with a pie. Rosario Vega sent food for a week. Thomas, who was 11 now and one of the best students in the school, came to the door with his father and stood very straight and said congratulations in both English and Apache, which made Evelyn cry in the way that new mothers cry at things that would not normally move them to tears. "Thank you, Thomas," she said, from her chair by the stove with the baby in her arms. "That is the nicest congratulations I have ever received." Thomas tried to hide how pleased he was and almost managed it. The months and the years moved through Copperhead Creek with the particular pace of life lived close to the land, marked by seasons and weather, and the steady accumulation of small things that build into a life. James grew. He walked at 11 months with a determination that Evelyn said came directly from his father, and Gilbert said came directly from his mother. He talked early, with a vocabulary that outpaced the other children his age in ways that made his mother proud and his father gently and privately delighted. Gilbert expanded the ranch. He negotiated a larger contract with the Army post and added 40 cattle to the herd in 1884. And with the additional income, he added a proper second room to the house and a covered porch on the south side where Evelyn's kitchen garden could be tended without full sun exposure in the brutal July afternoons. He hired 2 additional hands, a young man from Texas named Pierce who had the serious, weathered look of someone older than his 22 years, and Domingo Reyes's eldest son Miguel, who had grown up in Copperhead Creek and knew the land around the ranch better than anyone. Evelyn's work as district supervisor was producing results. 2 of the schools she oversaw had doubled their enrollment in the 2 years she had been visiting them, because the word among families with children was that the quality of teaching in the district had improved in specific, measurable ways. She was invited to Santa Fe in the spring of 1885 to speak to the Territorial Education Commission about methods for frontier schoolhouses. And she went, leaving James with Bess Hayloren for 3 days, and leaving Gilbert with written instructions about James's daily schedule that was so detailed and so precisely organized that he sat with it at the kitchen table after she left and read it twice, and then kept it where he could find it. She came back from Santa Fe with an offer from the commission to contribute to the development of a territorial curriculum, and the report of a dinner conversation with the territorial governor that she relayed with a dry amusement that suggested the territorial governor had underestimated her in the first 4 minutes of the conversation and spent the rest of it revising his assessment. "What did he say when he realized?" Gilbert asked. "He asked if I'd considered running for the school board," she said. "I told him the school board was elected by men and I was not currently on the list of people permitted to vote." She paused. He was quite uncomfortable about that. "Good," Gilbert said. She smiled at him across the supper table. "I do love you," she said. "You know that." "I know," he said. "I love you too." James, who was a year old and banging a spoon against his wooden tray with complete satisfaction, added his contribution to the conversation, which was unintelligible but emphatic. "He agrees," Evelyn said. "He always does," Gilbert said. "He's a very agreeable person." "He is," she agreed, "though I suspect that won't survive contact with adolescence." The frontier of 1885 was not the frontier of 1882. The territory was changing. The railroad had come through southern New Mexico and was changing the tempo of everything, bringing goods and people and information faster than the old stage roads ever had. Copperhead Creek was small enough to be off the main lines, but close enough to feel the change, and the settlement grew through the mid-1880s in the particular way of places that are close enough to growth to benefit from it without being consumed by it. The Reyes family expanded their trading post into a genuine general store. Bess Halloran added 2 rooms to the boarding house. A doctor named Nathaniel Clay arrived from Denver in 1884 and set up practice in a small adobe on the north side of the settlement, and his presence changed the ambient anxiety level of the community in a way that was difficult to quantify but deeply felt. A man had somewhere to go now when something was wrong, rather than riding 20 miles to the army post or waiting for the circuit doctor. Evelyn's teaching staff grew. By 1885, she had a second teacher in the Copperhead Creek schoolhouse, a young woman named Amelia Strand, who had come west from Ohio on the same species of independence and ambition that had brought Evelyn herself 3 years earlier. They worked together with the easy efficiency of 2 people who have the same foundational convictions about children and learning, and the difference between education and mere instruction. "You are exactly who I needed," Evelyn told Amelia in the fall of 1885, after a particularly good week in which both of their classes had produced a piece of written work that had genuinely surprised her. "I hope you know that." "I'm glad to be here," Amelia said. She looked around the schoolroom with the expression of a person who has arrived somewhere they intend to stay. "I wasn't sure about the frontier," she said. "Before I came, I'd heard stories." "Everyone hears stories," Evelyn said. "Most of them are true. The rest of them are true about a different kind of frontier than the one you actually live in." Amelia looked at her. "You're glad you stayed," she said. "It was not a question." "More than glad," Evelyn said, "but I won't pretend the choice was easy. It wasn't. It required me to go away and come back." "You went away?" "Once," Evelyn said. "Once was enough to know that away was not where I belonged." She told Amelia a little of it. Not all of it, not the words at the stage depot and the 4 months and the letters, not the most private pieces, but enough. She told it because Amelia was a young woman newly arrived on the frontier, and the frontier was genuinely hard, and she deserved to hear from someone who had gone through the hard part and come out the other side that the other side existed and was worth going through for. In the fall of 1885, Margaret came to visit. She came with Henry and James, who were now 11 and 8, and who had never been further west than Cincinnati. And she came with the particular look of someone who has agreed to something they are not entirely certain about. She arrived on the stage to find her sister waiting with a horse and a wagon, with Gilbert beside her looking exactly as advertised, which was large and quiet and capable, and the kind of man who helps without being asked, and does not require credit for it. Margaret watched him that first afternoon with the evaluating attention of a protective older sister and said very little. In the evening she sat at the kitchen table and ate Evelyn's red chili Colorado, the recipe she had learned from Rosario Vega and made her own in the 3 years since, and watched the dynamic between her sister and this man she had married, and allowed herself to be won over by what she saw, which was 2 people who were entirely themselves in each other's presence, who made space for each other without effort, who were, in the clearest and most unadorned sense, genuinely happy. "He is exactly who you said," Margaret told her on the second evening, sitting on the New South porch in the October dark. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I worried," Margaret said. "The frontier. You on the frontier with a man I'd never met." "I know you did," Evelyn said. "I know. But I can see." Margaret looked toward the barn where Gilbert was showing Henry and the other James how to properly curry a horse, the sound of their voices carrying softly in the evening air. "He loves you the right way." Evelyn looked toward the barn. She watched the lamplight inside it and the silhouettes moving within, her husband and her nephew and her small son, who had lately decided that the barn was the most interesting location in the known world. She felt the same thing she had felt on the creek bank in March, the same complete, settled, chosen happiness. "He left the lamp on every night," she said quietly, almost to herself. "4 months. I was gone for 4 months and he left the lamp on in the front window every single night." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "That is a very particular kind of man," she said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "He is." Margaret stayed 2 weeks. Her boys fell completely in love with the horses and the creek and the open land in the way that children who have grown up in cities sometimes do when they first encounter the alternative. On the day they left, Henry stood at the stage depot with his lower lip held very firmly and said he intended to come west permanently as soon as he was old enough. And James the younger said the same thing, and Gilbert shook both their hands seriously and said when they were ready they should write and he would see about finding them work on the ranch, and the looks on the boys' faces were worth approximately everything. Margaret hugged Evelyn for a long time at the depot. "Thank you," she said, "for coming to Cincinnati when I needed you, and for coming back here and being happy, both of those things." "Always," Evelyn said, "both of them always." The stage pulled out. Evelyn stood with Gilbert in the November morning watching it go, the same stage depot where she had arrived 3.5 years ago and where she had left and where she had come back, and she thought about all the arrivals and departures this particular strip of ground had witnessed and how much everything had changed. She took Gilbert's arm. "Can we ride north?" she asked. "Before we go home, to the creek?" "Of course," he said. They rode north in the November morning, along the dry arroyo and up to the creek bank, where the cottonwoods stood bare and silver-gray without their leaves, the water running low again after the summer. The sky above was the particular winter blue of New Mexico, deep and cold and completely clear, and the light on the pale rock of the creek bed was sharp and clean. She looked at the creek. She looked at the land around it, the beautiful, honest, frightening, alive land that she had almost convinced herself she was done with, the land she had run from and come back to and chosen in full daylight with all the information available. "I want to have another baby," she said. It surprised her slightly when it came out, though once it was in the air it felt like something she had known for a while. Gilbert turned to look at her. His expression was the one that had replaced all his guards, the full, unguarded one that she had watched slowly appear over 4 years of letters and visits and one departure and one return, the one she considered the greatest trust anyone had ever placed in her. "When did you decide that?" he asked. "Just now," she said. "Or sometime before just now, and I'm only saying it now." She paused. "James needs someone to argue with. He's starting to argue with the horses, and it is concerning." Gilbert laughed. "He argues with the horses because they never argue back." "Exactly," she said. "He needs a sibling." "All right," Gilbert said. "A sibling." She looked at him. "You don't have to just agree. We can discuss it." "I'm not just agreeing," he said. "I would like a house full of children with your dark eyes arguing about books, and I have thought that for some time." "A houseful," she said. "That seems ambitious." "All right," he said. "2 more." "2 more might be negotiable," she said. "2 more it is," he said. Their second child was born in the spring of 1887. A boy again, which surprised no one more than Gilbert, who had been entirely certain it would be a girl. They named him Robert after Gilbert's father, who had been a good man and was long gone. And Robert arrived into the world with considerably less drama than James had, and promptly demonstrated that he was going to be a placid and observant baby, which was a developmental strategy so different from his elder brothers that Evelyn found herself checking on him more often than strictly necessary simply because the quietness was unfamiliar. James, who was 3, received his brother with the combined emotions of a 3-year-old confronting a major life change, which were complex and inconsistent and eventually resolved, after a period of adjustment, into a possessive affection that expressed itself primarily in trying to teach Robert things Robert was too young to learn. "He is trying to teach the baby to read," Evelyn reported to Gilbert one evening, with a tone of combined exasperation and helplessness at the impossibility of being genuinely annoyed. "Is the baby taking to it?" Gilbert asked. "The baby is taking to the sound of James's voice," she said. "He likes to listen to James." "This will either be a great partnership or a catastrophe." "History suggests both sequentially," Gilbert said. "Your optimism is bracing," she said. "I am an optimist," he said. "It's one of my best qualities." "It absolutely is," she agreed. The late 1880s in Copperhead Creek were prosperous years for the Brooks Ranch and for the settlement generally. The water rights dispute that had been consuming the territorial government when Evelyn first arrived was finally resolved in 1886 in a way that was not perfect, but was functional, establishing clear use rights along the creek system that let the ranchers and farmers on both sides of the question plan with some confidence. Gilbert's beef contract with the Army post expanded when the Army expanded its regional presence, and the ranch's income grew steadily enough that he was able to pay off the original land loan he had carried since 1878 and burn the paper at the kitchen table one November evening in front of Evelyn and the boys, which was a ceremony of the small but significant kind that marks a life. Evelyn's influence on the territorial school system had become, by 1888, a thing the Territorial Education Commission referenced by name in its official correspondence with Washington. She had written 2 formal reports on frontier schooling that had been circulated to several territorial governments, and she had done it all while running a schoolhouse with 2 teachers and 61 enrolled students, and raising 2 sons, and managing the domestic complexity of a working ranch. She was not particularly interested in being celebrated for this. She was interested in the work and what the work produced, which were children who could read and write and think, and who had been told explicitly and often that their intelligence was not constrained by their geography or their family's resources. Thomas, who had come back from his quiet visit to congratulate the new baby with a gravity that Evelyn had loved, graduated from her schoolhouse at 14 as her best student since she had started teaching, and she helped arrange for him to attend a school in Santa Fe that could continue his education beyond what Copperhead Creek could offer. His father came to see her before Thomas left and thanked her with a directness and dignity that she tried to receive equally, and she told him honestly that Thomas was the most naturally gifted student she had ever taught, and that watching him learn was one of the privileges of her work. In 1889, their 3rd child came. A girl this time, Emma, who arrived with dark hair and an expression from her first week that suggested she was going to have opinions and intended to express them. She was correct. Emma had opinions about everything and expressed them from approximately 9 months onward, when her vocabulary was technically only 3 words, but she deployed them with a precision of emphasis that left no ambiguity about the nature of her views. The boys loved her with a protective fierceness that was both sweet and slightly alarming. James, who was 5 and reading well above his age, appointed himself her primary educator. Robert, who was 2 and a placid observer of the world's drama, watched Emma with an expression of philosophical interest. "She will run this family," Gilbert told Evelyn, watching Emma hold court in her chair at 6 months. "She will run more than this family," Evelyn said. "I am entirely confident of it." "You are not concerned about that." "Why would I be?" Evelyn said. "She is my daughter." The 1890s came to Copperhead Creek as they came everywhere in the territory, with change moving faster now than it had in the previous decade, the weight of settlement transforming the land and its rhythms in ways that were sometimes beautiful and sometimes not. The railroad came closer. The population grew. The frontier was still the frontier in the ways that mattered to people who lived it, the distances, the weather, the land's particular indifference to human plans, but the edges of it were blurring into something more ordinary, more safe, less raw. Evelyn noted the change with a complex feeling that she examined honestly, some relief, for the same reasons she had always had the fear. Some grief for the loss of a wildness that had been, when she chose it, the thing she loved as much as she feared. She talked to Gilbert about it on a Sunday morning ride in the spring of 1891, the children home with Pierce's wife who had become their regular Sunday morning arrangement. "Does it trouble you?" she asked. "The change?" "Yes," he said, and no, he was quiet for a moment. "I came here for something that was partly about the rawness, the sense that you were building from nothing, that the thing you were making was genuinely yours because you made it in a place that didn't have anything before you. He looked at the land around them, the ranch and the creek and the northern hills, entirely familiar now after 12 years. But I also want this place to be safe. I want our children to grow up in it without the things that made you lie on the floor in the dark. She thought about that. Maybe it can be both, she said, for a while. Maybe there is a version of it that keeps the honest land and loses the 2 in the morning gunfire. That's the version I'm building toward, he said. Me too, she said. She reached across and took his hand in the same gesture he had initiated on the creek bank 8 years ago. And they rode back to the ranch in the spring morning, with the sky above them doing what the New Mexico sky always did, which was to make everything seem both very large and very specific at once. A particular combination that she had never found anywhere else and had, once, almost left behind for good. The ranch house had grown by now, added rooms and a proper kitchen with a wood range replacing the old stove, a proper study where Evelyn kept her books and her district papers, a porch that ran the full length of the south side where in summer evenings the whole family gathered, the children with their activities and Gilbert with a book or a ledger, and Evelyn sometimes with her correspondence, and sometimes with nothing at all. Just sitting in the warm evening with the particular contentment of someone who knows exactly where they are and exactly why they are there. The lamp still sat on the wide front windowsill. She had not moved it. She had never moved it. Every evening when she came into the kitchen she turned it up, the simple repetitive gesture of years. And sometimes when she did it she thought about 4 months in Cincinnati, and a telegram sent from Santa Fe and the walk through the cold January settlement toward a yellow square of light. And she felt the same thing she had felt then, the relief and the return and the complete, absolute rightness of coming home. One evening in the autumn of 1892, James, who was 8 now, and in possession of the sharpest observational eye she had yet encountered in a child, asked her about it. He had been watching her from the doorway of the kitchen as she turned up the lamp. "Why do you always do that?" he asked. "Turn it up at night." She looked at him. Then she looked at the lamp in the window, burning warm and steady as it had burned every night for 10 years. "Your father left this lamp lit for me once," she said, "for a long time when I was away." James came further into the kitchen. He was interested in the way he was interested in everything, completely and with the intention of understanding. "Why were you away?" "I was frightened," she said, "of this place, of the frontier." She paused, finding the simplest, honest version. "I left for a while, and your father left the lamp on every night while I was gone, so that when I came back I would know I was welcome." James thought about this. "What if you hadn't come back?" he asked. "Then it would have kept burning," she said. "That's the kind of man your father is." James was quiet for a moment. "And that's why you always turn it up now," he said. "Because of that." "Yes," she said, "because of that." He nodded with the solemn, processing nod of an 8-year-old absorbing a piece of the world. Then he went back to whatever he had been doing, satisfied. His mother's history filed away in the large, orderly library that was his growing understanding of things. Gilbert came in from the barn half an hour later and found Evelyn at the stove and paused in the kitchen doorway and said, "James just told me something interesting." "Oh," she said. "He said you told him why you always turn up the lamp." There was something in Gilbert's voice that was quieter than his usual tone. "About when you were away." She turned to look at him. He was leaning in the doorway in his worn coat with the autumn evening at his back, and the lamplight from the windowsill reached across the kitchen and lit one side of his face, and he was looking at her with the full, unguarded expression, the one that had no guards left in it at all, the one that was her most treasured thing. "He asked why I did it," she said. "I told him the truth." "What did you tell him?" She set down the spoon she was holding. She crossed the kitchen to him. She took his face in her hands the way he had once taken hers, in the Albuquerque courtyard and the January kitchen and a dozen other moments that were all part of the same continuous gesture of, "I am here. You are my home." "I told him the kind of man you are," she said. I told him you left the lamp on for me. He put his hands over hers. And you came back, he said. And I came back, she said. I came back and I never left again and I never will. He turned his head and pressed his lips against her palm, the simple, quiet gesture of a man whose feelings had nowhere else to go. No, he said. You won't. She leaned her forehead against his. Around them the ranch house was full of the sounds of their life, James reading aloud to Robert from the next room, Emma's periodic decisive pronouncements about something, the evening fire settling in the stove, the horses in the barn, the great autumn dark pressing warm and close against the windows. The lamp in the front windowsill burned steady and clear, the way it had burned for 10 years, the way it would burn for all the years still coming, because some things, once started, do not require a reason to continue. Some things are simply what you do, night after night, because the person who matters to you deserves to always know there is a light in the window and they are welcome home. They stayed on the ranch through the 1890s and into the new century, watching Copperhead Creek grow and change around them while the ranch remained its own thing, honest and specific and theirs. James grew into a young man who read everything and argued passionately about it, and announced at 16 that he intended to study law in Santa Fe, which Evelyn received with exactly the pride and the amusement that the announcement deserved. Robert, who had been a placid observer all his life, turned out at 14 to have a profound and practical gift for the land itself, for understanding soil and water and the slow logic of ranching, and Gilbert began teaching him the work with the careful attention of a man passing on something he loves to someone who will love it equally. Emma was, as predicted, a force of nature. She read her mother's books before she was 10 and argued with her mother about them before she was 12, and at 13, she was writing letters to the Territorial Education Commission under her mother's name, drafting responses to policy proposals with a precision that made Evelyn revise her view of what 13 could accomplish. You cannot keep submitting my correspondence for me without telling me, Evelyn told her, holding one such letter. You were going to say the same thing, Emma said. I just said it better. That is not the point, Evelyn said. Isn't it though? Emma said. Evelyn looked at the letter. Then she looked at her daughter, who was sitting at the study desk with her dark eyes and her direct gaze and her complete conviction of her own correctness, and felt the specific, helpless love of a mother who recognizes herself in her child and cannot in honesty bring herself to argue too hard against it. Go help your father, she said. Father is helping Robert with the north fence, Emma said. They don't need me. Then go argue with James. James went to Santa Fe last week, Emma said. Remember, then go find something to do that does not involve submitting my professional correspondence without authorization, Evelyn said. Fine, Emma said, but you should send it. Evelyn sent it. She revised 2 sentences and sent it. The Territorial Commission responded within a fortnight with a request for a formal meeting in Santa Fe, which led to a series of policy changes in the territorial curriculum that had her name, Evelyn Wells Brooks, attached to them in the official record. She showed Emma the official correspondence. Emma read it and nodded with the satisfaction of someone who had expected nothing less. You are impossible, Evelyn told her. You are welcome, Emma said. Gilbert, reading the exchange from across the room, kept his expression carefully neutral with the practiced skill of a man who had learned over many years to pick his moments. The 20th century arrived in Copperhead Creek quietly, the way it arrived in most small places, less as a dramatic transition and more as a gradual accumulation of new things alongside old ones. The ranch house had a second story by 1900, Robert's addition, built with his own hands the summer he turned 15, wide and solid, and with windows on all 4 sides that Gilbert said were a waste of wall space and Evelyn said were worth every inch of it for the light they let in. James came home from Santa Fe for the summer before his final year of law school, brown from the sun and full of opinions about territorial governance that he delivered to his father across the kitchen table, while his father listened with the same patient attention he brought to everything, and occasionally offered a single, well-placed observation that reoriented the entire argument. "He does that on purpose," James told Evelyn privately. "He listens until I've talked myself into a corner and then he just points at the corner." "Yes," Evelyn said, "I know. It is very effective." "Yes," she agreed, "it is." Emma, who was 11 and listening from the hallway with no pretense of not listening, said, "He does it with me too." "I know you're there, Emma," Evelyn said. "I know you know," Emma said, and came in and sat down with the reasonable expectation of being included in the conversation, which she was, because in the Brooks household the children had always been expected to think and to contribute, and to sit at tables where real things were discussed. It was in the autumn of 1900 that Evelyn found Gilbert at the front window one evening, just standing there with his hand resting on the windowsill beside the lamp, looking out at the dark. She came to stand beside him. Outside the window the ranch spread out in the dark, familiar and quiet, the barn and the north pasture fence and the creek road going east toward the hills. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking about 18 years ago," he said. "October, when you left." She slid her arm around his waist. "I came back," she said. "January," he said. 4 months and 11 days. She looked at him. "You counted." "I did," he said. "Every day." He looked at the lamp in the window. "I never told you that." "No," she said. "You told me you left the lamp on. You didn't say you counted the days." "I didn't want you to feel guilty about it," he said. "You had good reasons for going." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window the autumn night pressed close and quiet around the ranch house. She could hear Robert moving around in the kitchen behind them, the sounds of the household settling into evening. "I felt guilty anyway," she said, "for a long time." "I know," he said. "I know you did." "I am still sorry for what I said at the stage depot," she said. "I have been sorry every day since." "Evelyn," he turned to face her. "You have apologized for that 100 times." "I know," she said. "It still feels like it needs saying." He looked at her with the full, unguarded expression. 50 years old or nearly, and the frontier had done what it did to everyone over time, weathered him, written the years in his face. But the expression was the same one that had been forming since he stood in front of her in a general store in April of 1882 with an unnecessary sack of cornmeal, and tried to think of something to say that wasn't transparent. "Stop," he said. "I forgave you before you got on the stage. I have never held it against you, not for a single day." She looked at him. "How is that possible?" "Because I knew why you said it," he said. "Because I knew you." Because the fear that makes a person say something that isn't true when they're running away from something they don't know how to face, that's not the truth of who they are. The truth is in what they do after the fear passes. He paused. "You came back. You left the lamp on," she said. "Yes," he said, "because you were coming back." She pressed her face against his shoulder for a moment. The same gesture she had made in an Albuquerque courtyard so many years ago when she had first said, "I think I love you," and had barely been able to get the words out. She was not a woman who had ever had trouble with words. Just with those particular ones to that particular person, because those words had always meant the most. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you every day for 18 years." "I know," he said. His voice was warm and quiet. "I love you every day too." Robert appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at his parents standing at the front window together and withdrew again with the practiced tact of a 16-year-old who had grown up in a house where this kind of scene was a known quantity and was entirely comfortable with it. Emma appeared 2 seconds later, evaluated the scene with her mother's precise dark eyes, and said, "Robert, put the kettle on. There will be tea in 5 minutes." "Thank you, Emma," Evelyn said without moving. "You're welcome," Emma said, with a dignity entirely characteristic of her, and went back to the kitchen. Gilbert's shoulders moved with the laughter he was keeping quiet. Evelyn felt it and laughed too, the same genuine, unguarded laugh that he had been waiting to hear back in the spring of 1882, and that she had been giving him freely every day since, as long as there was cause for it. They stayed at the window a little longer. The lamp burned on the sill between them and the dark. The same lamp that had been burning there since the night she first walked out the door, and he turned up the wick and left it lit. It was old now, the lamp, repaired twice and its glass chimney replaced once after a summer when James, at age 6, had made a gravitational error in the kitchen. But it was the same lamp. She had made sure of that. The tea was ready and Emma called them from the kitchen and Robert had put out the cups, and the house was warm and full of the sounds of their family in the evening. And Gilbert took her hand and she took his, and they walked back into the kitchen together toward the tea and the children and the long, lit evening of their life. Outside, through the window they had left, the lamp kept burning. Clear and warm and steady in the dark, the way it always had, the way she knew now it always would, not as a signal anymore, not as a thing kept against a possible absence, but as something better than that. As the particular light that belongs to a house where two people have built something real and kept it, through fear and departure and return and seasons and years, all the way to the kind of love that doesn't need explaining anymore because it simply is, as constant and honest as the land around it, as bright as the window that was always, always lit.